Welcome back to the Black Soonites, which is the 3rd of January. My last video, I think I pretty much blew it out of the water with the Catholic Church. Now, before I get to the videos on the disgusting perverts that they call the popes, I thought it would be a little more interesting to talk to you about this God Yahweh, Jehovah. Now, for the most part, I'm not going to go through the same analysis that I always do on this God. But I'll tell you what, I'm going to use archaeology as well as some very ancient scriptures that were kept out of the Bible. I'm going to show you who you're worshiping. I'm going to show you who and what you're worshiping. This Yahweh Elohim. Now, see, it's often been told or asserted that this God of Israel, this Tetragrammaton, this Yud He Vav He, was not only iconic, which I guess another term was imageless. And we know that's not true. I mean, people in the Bible have claimed to see him and hear him and talk to him, but it goes deeper than this. Recent discoveries, which you don't hear about, you have to dig this up, because they're sure in hell not going to come and volunteer this information. But there have been recent discoveries in Beersheba, as well as in Migdal Synagogue, where in Beersheba they found a Hebrew altar, and in the synagogue of Migdal, they found, which is in ancient Galilee, they found a stone proving that Yahweh, Jehovah, was depicted as a serpent throughout all of ancient Israel, also later known as Samaria and Judea. The myths surrounding the Israelite snake god Yahweh are found throughout the Bible itself. This should blow your freaking mind. But see, in order to understand this mindset of the ancient Hebrews, you have to comprehend their universe. Because, see, their universe consisted of a macrocosm, or should I say a macrocosmic heaven, where the gods, plural, where they dwelt as constellations. And then, of course, they had the earthly microcosmic world, which reflected the heavens above. Hence the term, as above, so below. Plain and simple. See, astral worship, or as we should say, astral theology, was an ancient form of worship in the Middle East. We know from Ugaritic literature that the astral gods, or the Council of the Stars, as they were called, were a part of the council of the chief god El, also named El Elyon. And this Ugaritic god was also worshipped, guess what? In Israel as El Elyon, and Elohim. Even though the term Elohim is plural. The God of the Tanakh, the Old Testament, El Elyon, presides over a council very similar of astral gods, according to Psalm 82. The native inhabitants of Ugarit, Israel, Judea, guess what? They were all Canaanites. Then you have the Sumerians, which is one of the oldest Middle Eastern civilizations, and designated their gods with a star, or what they called a dinger. And this sign meant God, goddess, and heaven. Now, the Sumerians, can't forget about them. They also greatly influenced the cultures that followed them, which included the Akkadians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and the Canaanites. And the Hebrews, guess what? They borrowed their religion from these cultures. And much like the empires surrounding them, the Hebrews were star worshippers, whose deities were astral gods. You can see that in Deuteronomy 4:19, 17:3, 2 Kings 17:16, 21, 2 through 5, 23:4, etc. And the astral gods are referred to in the Bible as the hosts of heaven. Whereas this Yahweh was depicted as an astral god surrounded by his fellow gods or host of heaven. Look at 1 Kings 22:19, where it says, "And Micaiah said, therefore hear the word of Yahweh. I saw Yahweh sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven standing beside him on his right and on his left," unquote. Oh, trust me, stick with me in this video. Stick with me. Because I'll tell you what, I'm going to go deep into this. Very, very, very deep. Now, when you look at the Assyrian Empire, they invaded the northern kingdom of Israel between 240 and 223 BCE. And at this time, many Israelites fled to, of course, the southern aspect of Israel, which was Judah. But then Judah came under Assyrian domination in 701 BCE. Then you have Babylonia defeating Assyria, and they captured Jerusalem 605 BCE. And at this time, many Judeans were deported to Babylon. They were freed by the Persians, and a remnant of the population returned to Judah. We know this. And because the kingdom of Israel was utterly destroyed by the Assyrians, and the Judeans were able to survive foreign capture and domination, which should tell you something, they retained control of all the myths, history, culture, and religion, which they wrote in their religious texts. So naturally, these texts favored the Judean view of the culture of history of Canaan, even though they're interwoven with the cultural history and myths of their northern neighbor Israel. This should be telling you something. Remember this statement. History is written by the winners. And since the Judeans, or the Jews, who were not Hebrews whatsoever, because they survived, they were able to write what they wanted to write in the scriptures. Keep that in mind. I will be doing further videos on that. Now, you have to understand something here. I'm going to go through a short list, which contains numerous references to what we call today the Arabic language. Because the archaic or biblical Hebrew flourished as a spoken language in the kingdom of Israel and Judah during the 11th to the 7th centuries. But yet the archaic form ceased to be spoken as a language during as well as after the Babylonian exile, at which time Aramaic became the day-to-day language. So the bulk of the biblical texts are written in classical Hebrew, with only a few in Aramaic. And classical Hebrew further evolved into the Mishnaic form, which became extinct between 200 and 400 CE. So the Hebrews translated their scriptures into Koine Greek in Alexandria, Egypt. And at that time, Egypt was dominated by the Macedonian dynasty. And there were several Greek translations of the Judean texts, but the translation most often used was what we call the Septuagint. Now, this type of Greek became the language used supposedly by the authors of the New Testament. Okay? Now, trust me, this will become important. So remember this. So now let's look at a list of biblical terms, okay? The Bible. What the hell is the Bible? It's a compilation, people, of Near Eastern literature that can be briefly summed up as an account of a people who are attempting to establish hegemony over a very lucrative incense trade. And it ran through Canaan, which was later known as Palestine. And these trade routes originated in the incense growing regions on the southern coast of Arabia, which extended into Canaan, the Levant, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Africa. And you had tribal confederations fighting for control of these trade routes. And they had regional rivals such as Egypt, Assyria, Aram, Babylonia. There was various tribal federations from the Arabian Peninsula, such as the Midianites and Ishmaelites. They also had to fight with local rivals, Jebusites, Edomites, Moabites, Hittites, Philistines, etc. And yet many of these pre-Hebrew tribes, with the exception of the Philistines, originated in the Arabian Peninsula. The Nephilim and Rephaim are biblical references to ancient non-Hebraic Semitic tribes who occupied the land before the advent of the Hebrews. And yet the authors of biblical mythology presented their particular deity, whom they believed was their sire who begat them. Hence Deuteronomy 32:18. And the source of their right to control the land and the lucrative trade routes that ran through it. Gee, this history that has been mythologized has done nothing but influence modern politics and commerce in that same region up until today. How many times do we hear this? Only Israel was chosen by God. The land belongs only to Israel. God gave it to them. The rest of us are goyim, we're cattle. Now, let me tell you something. The reason for the modern disputes, of course, have very little, if anything, to do with incense trade routes today. But it has everything to do with strategic location, oil, and oil trade routes, such as pipelines, sea routes. The Western gods of commerce and military might have replaced the ancient local, tribal, as well as fertility deities. Now, except for a Western religious subscription to this mythologized history, there seems to be very little real connection of modern conflicts to the biblical accounts of the Hebrew culture. See, you got to understand something. The Bible is not what you think it is. And I will be doing a video on this. And it will shock you. It'll shock you in a way that you'll look at it and go, oh my God, why didn't I see this before? It's right there in front of me. Trust me, it's going to shock you. The Bible is not what you think it is, people. But let's go on with biblical terminology. We have microcosm and macrocosm. This is where the heavens reflect the earth reflects the heavens, as above, so below. And it's represented by constellations, and these constellations are represented by gods. Then you have Gan Eden, or the Garden of Eden. Genesis 2:15. Now, biblical earthly paradise, which they say this was most likely a reference to what we call the Eden, the land from whence came gold, frankincense, and myrrh that were traded by the Hebrews from the caravan tribes of the Midianites and the Manaeans in the Negev desert. The name Eden means to mine ore. Now, ancient Yemen, especially under the Sabaeans, was renowned for its gold and gemstone mines. And don't forget, it had frankincense, myrrh, it had the lucrative trade routes, and this land was famous for its wealth. The Hebrews established trade relations with the Sabaeans, 1 Kings 10. Look at Isaiah 30, 6 through 7. Now, see, the biblical garden was inhabited by 3 serpent gods. Oh, yes. You had Ning-Izida, a Sumerian snake god, often portrayed as a caduceus, and as a man with 2 snake heads protruding from his shoulders. Then you had Yahweh, and you had Hawa. Adam was the only human residing in this garden. Now, see, Hawa is the proper way to say the name of Eve. We'll get back to that. Then let's see. You have Yah, spelled Y-A, Yah, spelled Y-H-H, Yahuwah, Y-H-H-W-H, Yahweh, Y-H-W-H, and then you have the Arabic equivalent, YHWY. These are all names for the biblical God who sired the Judeans, according to Deuteronomy 32. The 4-letter name, which is known as the Tetragrammaton, for this Hebrew God Yahweh Well, I don't want to get too far into that yet, but let me explain it this way. The Hebrew suffix hey or h becomes a y in Arabic, and vice versa, which is the reason that the Arabic equivalent of Yahweh would be spelled YHWY. But the YHWH, the Yud He Vav He, is one of three gods whose names are spelled with a similar tetragrammaton. I bet you didn't hear that in church. The other two gods are YGH, WTH, and YAWQ. Now, what one has to understand is that the name Yahweh is a compound name which contains a theophoric prefix. Yah means God. And it is followed by an attribute, Chava, which can mean both living and snake. And I find it funny that here it is Yahava, and everyone's saying Yehovah. Hova is the God of naughtiness, wickedness, perversity. Isn't that amazing? And Yahava can mean snake. Now you have a whole list of biblical names that would kind of start putting things in your mind, such as Yalam, Yah hides, Ya'anai, Yah answers, Ya'asau, Yah makes, Yabim, Yah discerns, Yazah, Yah helps, Yehoaz, Yah possesses, Yehoash, Yah fired, or Yah gave, Yehohanan, Yah gave, Yehoiachin, or Yehoiakin, Yah has strength. And it just keeps going. Now, the Semitic gods often had what they call compound names. Among these names is the Aramean god mentioned in what they call the Temastel, which was found in the Arabian city of the same name. And among the gods mentioned in the Aramean god, single, which means the god's sin is great. Then we have another Semitic god with the compound name, Tyrian, which is the god Melkart, whose name means king of the city. We have the god of Carthage, known as Belhaman, or the Lord of Haman. We have the Phoenician god of the Baca Valley, which is known as Baalbek. The Sumerian gods also had compound names, as indicated by Enki, Lord of the Earth, Ninlil, Lady of the Open Fields, Enlil, Lord of the Winds, Ninizida, Lord of the Good Tree, etc. But as for the compound name Yahweh, it appears that the early Yahwists created a double intender by appending Hawa to their god Yah, which made it Yahweh. Hawa meant the living, but the word also included Yahweh's sacred animal, the Nehushtan, or snake. Because, see, Yahweh was worshipped in the form of a snake, according to 2 Kings 18:4. Isn't that amazing how he was worshipped in the form of a snake? Now, see, Hebrew grammarians have attempted to give a grammatical explanation for the name, and they do this by claiming that it's a hip hill form of the root Hawa. And yet, the name Yahweh, as well as similar compounded deity names, predate any formalized explanation by at least a millennium. So we have Yah. Yah is the snake guardian of the tree of life. Yah is spelled with a double H. And in the Hebrew scriptures, it is spelled just as often as it is in the Negev inscriptions. It is spelled Yud He He, YHH. And YHH is one of the earliest forms of the name for Yahweh, which the Hebrews originally pronounced as Yahuwah. The double H became a dividing point. So it originally became two words. Yah, the name of deity, and Hawa, the ancient word for serpent. It was merged into a single word, Yahweh. And yet, however, the Hebrew God is addressed repeatedly by his most ancient name, which is spelled YHH. He is specifically named this in Psalm 68:4. It says, and I quote, "Sing to God, sing praises to his name, extol him who rides on the clouds by his name, YHH, and rejoice before him." Psalm 68 is one of the pre-exilic psalms in the Tanakh. It's repeated in Exodus 15:2. YHH is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation. This YHH name appears over 50 times in the Tanakh. This name is written in the Negev inscription as a snake's head with a protruding forked tongue. And according to Dr. James R. Harris, the Hebrews carved Yahweh's full image as a radiant serpent among these inscriptions. Harris's conclusion that the early Hebrews were responsible for these inscriptions is supported by the many carvings of inscriptions of what later became known as the Jewish menorah. I want you to think about this, people. These Hebrew inscriptions show Yahweh as a radiant serpent. What does your Bible tell you? You are to what? Beware of that old serpent, that dragon, the devil. And who in the hell are you worshiping? The very serpent you're told to stay away from. Isn't that amazing? Now, we also have YHW, YHH, YHHWH. All these were recorded as YHW in the Temple of Soleb, which was kept by the ancient Egyptians as the god of the Shasu, which is a Bedouin tribe, otherwise known as Midianites. And current scholars pronounce the hieroglyphics as, guess what? Yahoo! Oh my God, isn't there a search engine on the computer called Yahoo? Now, Yahoo was adopted by the ancient Hebrews through the Midianites, where he became known as YHH or just YH, Yah. And yet, YHH is thought to be a Sehadic, which is an old Southern Arabic word for an ancient Semitic word for life. And yet, the term for life, Hawa, means not only life, but snake. Now, when you put these words all together, for life, for snake, all of this, what you literally get from the term Yahweh is the living snake god. Or if you just use the YHH, the coiling one. This god originated as a serpent cult, and his image was carved by the Hebrews on their Beersheba altar, which is dated to 800 BCE, and it is on the Galilean Migdal synagogue stone, which existed as part of that synagogue during the time that Christ is said to have walked the earth. Isn't that amazing? Then you have what we call the macrocosmic Yahweh, the heavenly snake. This snake is known as the constellation Draco, which is dragon. So you have this Draco constellation. In the Middle East, it's known as Tanin, which means snake or dragon. And this can be found in Isaiah 27:1, Exodus 7:10. In Isaiah, the word Tanin describes the sea monster Leviathan, while the same word in Exodus describes Aaron's staff, which was transformed into a snake. Now, the snake constellation at Tanin was the location of what they call the pole star, or Al-Thuban. Al-Thuban means snake. And the ancient Semitic peoples believed that the pole star was a deity that all the constellations revolved around. Now, the pole star, also known as Polaris, was later moved to the constellation Ursa Minor, which makes it appear that Draco was wrapped around Polaris, a pole star, which the Hebrews thought of as the celestial tree of life. So we have this symbolism that can be seen in the Nehushtan, the brazen serpent coiled around a pole, and in the reference to Yahweh seated on his throne, surrounded by the host of heaven, as well as the biblical portrayal of Yahweh as a storm god, whose image was a flying, fire-breathing dragon in 2 Samuel. That's right, 2 Samuel 22, 4 through 16. These verses state that as Yahweh descended from his starry throne to the earth, and I quote, there went up a smoke out of his nostrils, and fire out of his mouth devoured. Coals were kindled by it. He mounted the cherubim and flew. He soared on the wings of the wind. This same image is repeated in Psalm 18. Now, in my distress, I called to the Lord, which is actually Yahweh. I cried to my God for help. From his temple, he heard my voice. My cry came before him into his ears. The earth trembled and quaked, and the foundation of the mountain shook. They trembled because he was angry. Smoke rose from his nostrils, consuming fire came from his mouth, burning coals blazed out. He parted the heavens and came down. Dark clouds were under his feet. He mounted the cherubim and flew. He soared on the wings of the wind. He made darkness his covering, his canopy around him, the dark rain clouds of the sky. Out of the brightness of his presence, clouds advanced with hailstones and bolts of lightning. The Lord thundered from heaven, and the voice of the Most High resounded. He shot his arrows and scattered the enemy. With great bolts of lightning, he routed them. The valleys and the sea were exposed, and the foundations of the earth laid bare at your rebuke, Yahweh, at the blast of the breath of your nostrils. Unquote. In 2 Samuel 22:9 and in Psalm 18:6 through 15, which I just read, Yahweh's portrait is almost identical to the description of the evil sea monster called Leviathan in the book of Job. Let me read this to you from chapter 41. This is verse 12 all the way through 21. And it states, I quote, I will not fail to speak of Leviathan's limbs, its strength, its graceful form. Who can strip off the outer coat? Who can penetrate its double coat of armor? Who dares open the door of its mouth, ringed about with fearsome teeth? Its back has rows of shields tightly sealed together. Each is so close to the next that no air can pass between. They are joined fast to one another. They cling together and cannot be parted. Its snorting throws out flashes of light. Its eyes are like the rays of dawn. Flames steam from its mouth. Sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke pours from its nostrils as from a boiling pot over burning reeds. Its breath sets coals ablaze and flames dart from its mouth. Unquote. Everybody's worshiping the great serpent, the dragon. The very thing in your very Bible that you are told and warned about. Isn't that amazing? I mean, I can't stress this enough. This God, Yahweh, in Revelation, which isn't even a Christian book, describes himself as the beast. And then the book of Hosea is the same description of him as the beast. And now you're learning what he actually is. You're seeing descriptions of him in your Bible. But did you know that this snake god is also the god of the moon? Isn't it amazing how he wanted the Israelites to have a lunar calendar instead of a solar? Everything, every holiday, every Sabbath, you have to look at the moon. And the conflation of the moon and snake deities also explain why he's worshipped in this form. 2 Kings 18, Ezekiel 8. He's always associated with the moon. Hell, he appeared on Sinai, the moon mountain. And the sacred animal of the Semitic moon god was the snake. I mean, my God, people. My God. What do you not understand? Now, isn't it weird? One of the highest of angels is known as a seraphim. And this name derives from the root seraph, which means poisonous or flaming serpent. I mean, come on, people. Do I even have to go into any more of this? Christians and Jews are worshiping the snake god, are worshiping the serpent, the dragon. And there's so much more evidence that I can go into. So much more. But why should I? I think I've proven my point on this, and this should blow your freaking mind. Oh my God, how many religious people, especially Christians, oh, stay away from that old serpent, the devil, the dragon. That's all you hear them saying. And they're quoting the Bible. Oh, that serpent, that dragon, the devil. And it's the very fucking God that they're worshiping. They're not worshiping the true God. They're worshiping a God that wants human sacrifice, a God that wants blood, a God that loves to smell roasting flesh, a God who says, pay me money. Now, think about everything you've ever heard of dragons. They received human sacrifice. They always had gold and silver around them. I mean, the Bible literally says he hisses at his people. He has horns coming out of his hands. He has wings. He breathes fire and smoke. This is the God that Christians and Jews worship. What more do I need to say? Isn't it funny when you look at the bishops, the metropolitans, the popes, their staffs have snake heads on them, serpents. Why would Christian bishops and metropolitans and patriarchs, why would their shepherd staffs have the heads of serpents on them? Isn't it funny? How come it is no one asks? And Protestants, you think you're safe? No, you're not. You're praying to the same fucking God they are. You read this fucking Bible every goddamn day. You memorize verse and chapter, and still you have no fucking clue what it says? Isn't it amazing? The Quran says exactly that about Christians and Jews, that they study these holy books and still have no understanding of it. It's time to wake up. It really, really is. See you next time.